So welcome everyone to this PLSA Policy Insights webinar. My name is James Walsh. I'm Head of Membership Engagement here at the PLSA, and it's my pleasure to chair this session on LGPS, consolidation, pools, and the future. Plenty to talk about there. We've got three excellent panelists to talk us through these issues, and I'm going to ask them to come in very quickly, each of them, and introduce themselves, starting with Neil Mason, if you're right there, Neil.
Yeah, thanks, James. Neil Mason. I'm a member of the PLSA Policy Board and the chair of its local authority committee. And in my day job, I'm a senior LGPS officer at the Surrey County Council Pension Fund.
Excellent, thanks, Neil. And we've also got Ewan McCulloch.
I'm Ewan McCulloch. I'm also on the PLSA Policy Board, and I'm the Chief Stakeholder Officer at Border to Coast, one of the 8 LGPS pools. And I've been here for about 4.5 years.
Thanks, Ewan. And then we've got my colleague, Maria Espadinha. Morning, Maria.
Morning, James. Morning, everyone. As James said, I am working at the PLSA at the policy team. I'm a policy lead, and I have the delightful task of working in everything related to the LGPS. Looking forward for today. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. So we've got a really good lineup there. I'm conscious, of course, with Neil and Ewan, we've got two sort of border to coast pool reps, if you like. It's just the way it's worked out, but we'll make sure we do get a very diverse debate as we go through the session. And I know you, the audience, are going to ping us lots of questions, which you can do at any time, and we will pause several times for questions. So let's get lots of different views, comments, or questions. So the way we're going to do this today is we're going to chunk it up, really. We're going to start by having a few words from Maria on the state of play, quick recap on what's happened on LGPS policymaking recently and what is expected next. Then we'll move on to a section on consolidation and what are the challenges for the LGPS, and we'll hear from Neil and Maria on that. And then we'll have 2 or 3 minutes for Q&A. Then we'll talk about the future of pooling. We're bringing Ewan into the conversation. More Q&A then. And then our final sort of topic will be about the Mansion House agenda, that whole question of LGPS investment. And again, we'll have more questions. After that, we will circulate the recording. After this, we won't be circulating slides because we've barely got any slides, really. So just for recording. But perhaps before we get into the meat of the discussion, I'm going to turn to Neil. Neil, could you just sort of say a word or two about our local authority committee? What's its role, who's on it, and so on?
Yeah, thank you, James. First of all, I would say it's lovely and sunny in Staines, open bracket, upon Thames, close brackets. As far as the local authorities committee's role is concerned, so it's made up of senior LGPS fund officers, some of which you'll see on the screen there, and it seeks to champion all issues affecting the LGPS. We meet 3 times a year, and we help with the PLSA's policy and advocacy team to steer policy positions on behalf of the LGPS. So we have the current members on the screen there. I'm sure you can also see, but it's very exciting. We're going to have some new members to announce. We know who they are, but I think they're officially going to be announced later this week. So you can wait. There are some fantastic members to already stellar cast on the screen there, James.
They are, yes. So waiting with bated breath for that announcement. We're just hoping to make it a day or two ago, but anyway, very shortly. So look out for that one. And thanks, Neil, to you and your colleagues on the committee for the great work we do, helping to sort of shape and guide our policy. So I'm going to turn to Maria now. Maria, could you give us a sort of recap of what have been the key policy milestones over the last few months, just to bring us up to date?
Sure. Thank you, James. So I think, as James mentioned, this started with the Mansion House speech, if you want to call it, that announced a series of measures for pension schemes, including the LGPS. As you all know, the LGPS England and England and Wales Next Step on Investments consultation was launched, and a couple of announcements were made on that consultation. We will go into detail into those further today. The response, unusually, the response was quite quick. It came a couple months later in the autumn statement. And I think the main points that were launched in the consultation are here to stay, like transferring of assets, more discussions on the future of pooling, investment in productive finance, a lot of things like that. In the government's response, there were several pieces of guidance that were announced. We've seen the first piece being also announced in the budget quite recently, where it was said that the new annual report guidance will be launched for LGPS funds. That came a couple of weeks later, and this guidance requires that LGPS funds provide a summary of asset allocation, including UK equity investments, and greater clarity on the process of pooling. And in the first year, this is all going to be done on a best endeavors basis, but then funds are expected to comply with this in the next years. I think so. That's basically what has happened quite recently.
Okay, thanks, Maria. And the obvious question is, what can we expect next?
Yes. So there are a couple of other guidances or consultations that we are waiting. One that was also promised in the government's response is a guidance on the future of pooling and pool model, or the models that pools take, and how is that going to go forward. We're also expecting two consultations not directly connected with this. One on survivor benefit rules and the other one on good governance. This has been something that the sector has been waiting for some years now, and although it's not directly related with the investment consultation, I think it will be quite important for establishing relationships and governance rules. So we also are expecting that sometime in the summer. Of course, this is all dependent on not having an election before that.
Always dependent on politics, isn't it, Maria? But we shall see. Okay, so that's going to put positions us sort of where we are now. I mean, Neil, consolidation is obviously a big sort of theme in all this. But what do you think the challenges really are for LGPS funds? What's your assessment of that?
Okay, so on the question of politics, I probably ought to start with the rider. I'm speaking today as part of the local authority committee for the PLSA, so I'm not speaking on behalf of the Surrey, in case any of my colleagues or bosses are listening, and certainly not speaking on behalf of Border to Coast. So I'll endeavour in this role to try and give a balanced view of the interests of the LGPS community. So I'd start with one thing that I think is generally acknowledged in the sector, is that LGPS funds have had an ongoing and increasing issue with recruitment and retention. And this has been brought about by the governance arena in which we operate becoming increasingly and more complex. I mean, we're effectively satellite companies in our own right, separate from our authorities. And the challenge of consolidation is that we have 8 pools with all different models unique to the geography or the governance setup in which they were constituted. And this ranges from those which are pretty close to a fiduciary management model to some which are pretty much shared services. So there isn't consistency across the piece. And the view on which of these model is most effective, I suppose, depends entirely on which pool representative you speak to. So there is a huge amount of sunk cost out there as well. And that makes these conversations emotionally quite difficult for funds and pools to have. The biggest issue for me is the abject failure of the LGPS owners of capital through many iterations, as long as I've been, to effectively speak with one voice. And there are a myriad of actors in the LGPS ecosystem, which makes that whole landscape difficult to navigate. And that was evidenced in the governance matrix work that the PLSA did last year. In my view, the biggest single challenge facing the LGPS is the overt conflict of interest that exists between the administrative authority councils and the pension fund. This puts elected members and officials in an incredibly invidious position. You have a situation where there are still a number of part-time senior pensions officers out there, because the head of pensions has always been the chief finance officer responsible for an increasingly challenging council budget. This model is not optimal in my view. The pension fund should always act in the interest of its members and its employers and its taxpayers, and not any single council or its financial or political priorities. That's not to say that pension funds and councils can't be mutually enabling, both in their operational and their investment strategies, talking about the levelling up piece, and indeed supporting councils in their financial challenges. So in essence, the biggest challenge to me is the biggest challenge it was yesterday, and it's the biggest challenge it will be tomorrow, is getting the governance right, James.
Very interesting, Neil. Yeah, big challenges indeed, you're right. And any thoughts on the solution?
Well, better governance for a start. I mean, the good governance review from the Scheme of Priority Board was a start, and we desperately need regulations to support this as soon as possible. I understand it's later this year. It will be an absolute delight to me if it is. With better governance, I think a number of the other issues in the LGPS is just wither away.
Right. Yeah.
There are solutions. They include more close working collaboration is key, shared services. The pool structures do actually offer opportunities to develop this, whether that be in centres of expertise or to really deliver shared services more effectively. And there is a lot of evidence that moving the dial from where we currently are in the balance between strategy and implementation can potentially add value. Now, I know you want me to talk about fund consolidation too, and having had some experience of this in our pool in Border to Coast when Tyne and Wear and Northumberland merged, it's devilishly difficult. Remembering these two actually wanted to get together. And it's not always the case that we have suitors who actually want to get married. Look, I'm not sure 86 is the right number. But the LGPS community needs to be inventive, it needs to be disruptive, and it needs to be brave in innovating its solutions to this problem. It also fundamentally needs to ensure that it has the outcome of members and employers and local taxpayers as the guiding objective of everything it does. And by the way, James, that goes for the government too. Before they start throwing things over the wall, it's about members, it's about employers, it's about taxpayers. I've seen George Graham's on the call, and George made a very considered article last week, thoughtful piece that considers the pension fund authority model they've got at South Yorkshire, where control is shared in a sort of joint committee type of arrangement, and power is also controlled and shared there. This avoids this sort of takeover approach, merger and acquisition type of thought about pools and funds, and particularly funds. And again, it allows the single priority to be the effectiveness of the pension fund.
Yeah, great comments, Neil, and very much agree with all that. Maria, what's the official PLSA perspective on what Neil's been saying?
I think we run the risk of being very in agreement with Neil on most things that he says. I think a couple of points that Neil made that we are very keen on. Anything that is done on consolidation needs to be done at a pace that protects the value of the contributions paid by employers and employees. We've been supportive of the current consolidation of assets into the 8 pools. where it is in the interest of scheme members and where the pools are equipped to provide sustainable investment products. But as we said in our response to the government consultation, this transfer of assets, it will take time, and this will take time to ensure that they are not invested poorly. And there are a number of key governance and administration issues that, for example, Neil mentioned, the Good Governance Project. And these are key for the LGPS funds to function properly. So I think a little bit of a more holistic view of the funds in relation to this aspect, not just investment, but everything else that makes investments work properly, is quite important. So we're very positive to see that we're going to have some movement on the Good Governance Project. We also think the LGPS Scheme Advisory Board needs to be very well funded to support and be able to support their work. And we hope to continue to work with the government on this.
Okay, thanks, Maria. That's great. And I see Joe Fiskwood is just asking, could the link to George Graham's article that you were mentioning, Neil, be shared? I'm not quite sure about that, about issues and so on. But we'll see what we can do on that. So we'll look at that straight after the webinar.
It's on the Local Government Chronicle website. I'm sure it can be shared on the chat.
It's on the website. Fine. Thanks, Ewan. That's great. So the answer in that case is yes, Joe. So we'll ping a link round. Brilliant. Thanks, Ewan. So Ewan, we're turning to you because let's spend a few minutes talking about the future of pooling. What's your assessment of current government thinking on that issue?
I remember when I first joined the LGPS world, and I was told the government was about to publish a consultation imminently. I hadn't quite realised imminently actually meant 4 years. However, they finally published a consultation, and in November they published their response. And I suppose whether you like it or not, the government paints a very clear picture of what it believes the future should look like. So there's probably it covers lots of territory, but there's probably 5 main areas that's worth focusing on. The first is the government wants to accelerate and expand pooling. It wants the administrating authority setting out how they're investing their funds and why, and they're wanting to have a very clear transition plan to transfer the remaining of the assets by March 2025. The second is the government is proposing for funds to have a plan to invest up to 5% of assets to support levelling up in the UK, clearly, whilst also delivering good returns. The government also has an ambition to increase investment into high growth companies via principally private equity, but also some areas of private credit. So they mentioned an ambition of the LGPS to invest 10% in this area. As Neil alluded to, the government also has a long-term plan to, or at least an ambition to reduce the number of pools. Implicitly, they suggest 4 or 5 is the right number by, I think it's 2040. But again, without any clear roadmap as to how this would be achieved. And finally, the government is seeking to update regulations on how pension funds use investment consultants. Those are the 5 main areas.
Okay, yeah. And as you say, it's quite a clear vision, I suppose, Ewan. We've got now still a fairly new local government minister in Simon Hoare MP.
Yeah.
What have you picked up about his sort of personal view of all this?
Simon, I think, has a very clear passion for the LGPS. I mean, he's spoken a number of times where he believes, he recognizes there are challenges within the LGPS and he's quite passionate about ensuring the LGPS operates for the long term in a sustainable manner. And I suppose what he's doing to the LGPS is acknowledging the policy environment over the last 5, 6, 7 years. He's actually asking the LGPS to come up with a solution to ensure it can operate in the long term. So, for example, on funds, he believes that their capacity and resilience would be improved if there are fewer of them. But again, he is reluctant to try and impose a solution, and he's asked for funds to be innovative about how they can develop solutions. And I agree, the article by George Graham is a nice illustration of an alternative route than the traditional consolidation. He's also emphatic that pooling needs to be completed by 25, and he's making it fairly clear that those who are not making good progress will be compelled to do so. Now, obviously, we all know there's a general election coming up. we all know the probability of the polls suggests that the chances of Simon Hoare being in office in a year's time is reasonably remote. So there is, of course, a question of why should we be listening to him? And again, if anybody else was at the conference at Cardiff Park, the minister addressed this issue himself. He believes that LGPS is a non-political issue. He's made it very clear that he enjoys a very close relationship with his equivalents on the Labour front bench, and he believes that there is a broad cross-party consensus in ensuring that LGPS should operate in the long term. So, and he may well be right. Again, if you look at some of the Labour Party positionings, whether it's on the Mansion House agenda or in their financial services policy document, if anything, Labour appears to be taking a more aggressive stance on these topics than the current government.
Yeah, okay. And of course, we've got the minister, Simon's coming speaking at our local authority conference in the Cotswolds, 11th to 13th of June. So opportunity to question him there, as long as he's in office, as you say, Ewan, that should be very useful, I think. And I believe he's going to spend quite a bit of time with us at the conference, sort of doing his formal speech and a little bit of behind the scenes meeting with some members as well. So that's quite positive, actually. Neil, what are the comments have you got on what Ewan's been saying about pooling and the government's agenda?
Yeah, nothing. I'm not going to diversify much from what Ewan said. I do think that there is a constant call for clarity in policy, and I'd welcome that. And yes, I think the mood music is that whichever government we have, the overall principles won't change. And I think, to be fair to the department, I remember Theresa Clay speaking a number of years ago about the need for the LGPS community to find inventive solutions, to self-solve this problem, to be brave. And I do get a bit frustrated when I hear, well, we need to wait for the pooling guidance before we do anything. You know, it's very clear that we need to consolidate and collaborate more. And there are ways we can do that now, which are, again, effectively supporting our members and our employers and the taxpayers. We can do that. We can do that right now. And there are actually some good examples of that already out there.
Yeah. Thanks, Neil. And thanks also to David Crum. I see David's put a note in the chat with a link to George Graham's article. So that's great. Cheers, David. Thanks for that. And perhaps we can put the link in the email we send around afterwards with the recording. Maria, while we're on pooling, I mean, what are you and the PLSA policy team doing on that front? And maybe you can say a bit about the conversations we have with government on these issues.
Yes, I think at the end of last year, one of the decisions made by the policy board was that this was a priority topic for the LGPS for this year and for the PLSA, and so it's also one of our priority projects. So we are working on. We established a working group. The goal is to basically come up with a document or a briefing paper. The name is still being decided. This will just establish a clear PLSA view of how our member funds and pools will like the interaction between them to operate. It doesn't aim to be guidance, it's just aiming to say, this is the scenario, what can you be doing, looking a little bit in the future. So that work is starting. I cannot say more than, you know, we're having discussions about how we're going to approach this, and the goal is to publish this later in the year. We're going to be engaging DLUC and SAB over this during that time. We had a first kind of meeting with DLUC about it, and so we've been engaging on that. They're still aiming to publish the rest of the guidance this year. So we hope that it's going to be an aid of that guidance, not competing with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Thanks, Maria. We've got one or two questions starting to come in, and do post your questions in the Q&A box. I'm keeping a closer eye on it. So we've got one first on pooling from an anonymous attendee who wants to know, does the panel think that the March 2025 deadline for transfer of assets to pools is achievable? Neil, what's your view on that? the fund side of things?
Well, to get all of the money transitioned into the pools by March 25 is completely unachievable. But I don't really think that's what the governor are looking for. I think that what the government are looking for is clearly laid out transition plans by March 25 that can then be tracked and followed. So that should be eminently achievable for every LGPS fund.
Yeah, sure. And Ewan, what's your comment on this one?
I've difficulty disagreeing with Neil. Look, it for an individual fund, it is not impossible. There are several funds throughout the LGPS who have essentially transferred, if not 100%, all but 100% of their assets. But there's a large number of funds that have not done that. I think the government is more interested in the direction of travel and it being delivered in a fairly tight time frame than they are in exact percentage numbers.
Okay, thank you very much. And I see Robert Winston's, I think, put what's really a question in the chat, which is okay, but do try and put your questions in the Q&A box if you can. It makes my life a lot easier. But Robert's question is, with the government's vision of reducing the number of pools by 2040, should pools be allowed to invest in other pooled investment products that are outside of their pool to obtain economies of scale, rather than be limited to those investment products within their own pool? Ewan, maybe that's one for you.
So on a technical basis, I mean, we were asked this question in the consultation, and we said there are no technical challenges towards achieving this. Yeah. There are challenges, but that they're not insurmountable. I suppose our concern is actually more of a cultural element. We were created by and we are owned by our 11 partner funds. What we do is specifically for them. And I think that our partner funds work incredibly hard to form consensus in delivering things that is right for them individually, but also collectively. And if you begin to take on board assets that are owned by other pools, perhaps some of that magic is lost, and there's a danger that the pool becomes slightly distracted from its focus on serving its partner funds. So it is not impossible, but it needs to be progressed very cautiously.
Okay. Neil, any view on that one?
You can't keep agreeing. This makes it a little bit dull, doesn't it? I mean, I think that there are clear governance complications which Ewan talks about, but it does seem a bit daft to me that we have 8 pools that are all duplicating quite complex product designs when some pools are concentrating or more further in the delivery of those particular product designs. It does seem to me optimal that there are opportunities for funds to go into already fully developed assets designs, but as I say, there are governance complications, but none of them are insurmountable.
Okay, thanks. And we're going to move on to talk about Mansion House agenda in just a moment, but I just want to skip back. Neil, there's a question that came in a few minutes ago. Have the good governance proposals been shelved? The government just now has other priorities for the LGPS. Is that the case?
I think so. Not according to the Scheme Advisory Board. I know Joe Donnelly has been saying we expect some regulation sometime this year. So yeah. No, I don't think it's been banged down the agenda. They might have other things to think about.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's what we're doing as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Fine. Okay. Fine. That's well. There's another one we'll come back to later. Okay. Well, let's move on to what's going on the Mansion House agenda, because this is such a sort of political sort of topic. Lots of debate about getting more pension fund investment into supercharging the UK economy. Ewan, what's really driving this agenda, and what's the problem do you think that the government's really trying to tackle?
I suppose the question is, do you want to be a realist or a cynic? One argument, and the most obvious, I'll say neither for the benefits of this. There is an argument that the government's trying to generate the Brexit dividend, and it's making a series of financial services reforms to encourage innovation, growth, and certainly as part of the original speak, the government committed to repealing almost 100 pieces of regulation. A more cynical perspective, which is probably where I would lean towards, is there are significant financial challenges. Over the last 20 years, the UK has experienced relatively low levels of both public and private sector investment. With increasing debt, with increased limited fiscal flexibility, the Mansion House agenda is about the government trying to, I'll use the phrase, encourage the pension sector and asset owners to invest more in the UK, whether that's through listed equities, private equity, or in the case of the LGPS, to support the levelling up agenda.
Yeah, thanks, Ewan. And what's the sort of current state of play on this, and what's the next step going to be, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the government is still progressing with the agenda, and certainly in regards to the LGPS, it's making it very clear what its expectations are. Now, again, the minister, when he was speaking, made it very, very clear that he recognised the responsibility of funds to invest, to deliver investment returns. But nonetheless, he said that there was an opportunity to drive dual benefits as a kind of public sector and a pension scheme funded and working for people working in local government. There was a dual opportunity. Regardless of the outcome of the general election, the fundamental issue remains. Government is going to be looking for, the pension sector to be delivering investment to drive UK economic growth.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. And Neil, what's the view from the local authority committee?
Yeah, I think from the local authority committee is that we have already made good steps in this place already, working together, things like the GLIL, recently the London Fund, and other collaborative initiatives show that the LGPS has got the appetite to support this levelling up agenda. But look, the UK, we have to face it, the UK has not been a great bet over the last 10 years or so when compared to global opportunities. And ultimately, we are the stewards of capital, and we can't ignore this. However, there is enough evidence to show we can get ourselves on the same page as UK PLC, but particularly if we might be incentivized to do it. And the government needs to look at what the liability profile is of the LGPS as well. And ultimately, I'm a bit like a broken record here, but ultimately the solution has to support the members, the employers, and the local taxpayers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that's been a key part of the message that our colleagues here have been putting to government, across the sort of Mansion House debate. But it would be helpful if there was a pipeline of investable, suitable assets, and then there would probably be more interest. Maria, perhaps you can say a bit more about what we've been doing to influence this agenda and what impact we've had.
Yes, thanks, James. I think for more than a year now, we've been working on this, and we've been engaging with government, civil servants, MPs, other stakeholders. I think it's also safe to say that we played a really important part into making the argument that mandating investments from a government perspective wouldn't be the best option, not only for all that it has to in relation to fiduciary duty, but also because, as Neil was saying, the best way for us to get LGPS funds and other pension schemes to invest in productive finance assets is to have the right pipeline of those assets and opportunities in the market. So we did say this in our response, and we've been engaging government on this. We keep saying that the best way is by considering fiscal incentives for these investment opportunities to present themselves for funds, and that way funds can take them on board, because I think it's been, for some funds, it's been 20, 30 years they've been investing in private markets assets. So the investments are there. It's not because they don't want to invest in those asset classes. Sometimes because the right opportunities are not available.
Thanks, Maria. I'm going to ask you in just a moment about what he's picking up about Labour's thinking on this. But I just see there's a good question from David Crum in the Q&A box there. And David's asking, he says, the government want the UK to be the world's next Silicon Valley, but Silicon Valley is arguably better known for venture capital investment than traditional private equity, pushing the asset allocation approaches of the LGPS to have more venture capital is fine, but it will have consequences in terms of overall risk return characteristics. Plus, should well-funded LGPS funds be taking more investment risk at this time? Neil, that sounds like one for you. Do you want to take more risk?
It depends on you. I mean, I'm going to throw a few ideas around here. Look, firstly, we don't have to target buyout. So that's the first thing to remember. But there are a number of things that we can do with our surpluses. I know that there have been discussions around whether or not we can use it to support employer contribution rates. That's one option. There are discussions of whether we can actually, you know, as David mentions, we can actually take a more speculative view on our investments. Ultimately, I think the mood music around in the LGPS at the moment is that there is a strong argument to de-risk. It's not one I particularly share because we have a huge duration in the LGPS. It's an open scheme, so I do think that LGPS has a lot of options in this area. Yeah.
Okay, and perhaps just while you're there, Neil, there's a question just come in from Tim Bird who says LGPS funds have always been under pressure to invest locally, and many have done so. But is this pressure and endeavour now much broader? Do you feel that?
It's not something that I've seen at local level. I think where there is, what I would say is that there is increasing pressure in the RI space, which I think speaks to the same sort of issue, really, in that there are local priorities that are having more influence on decisions of pension fund. Yes, I think ultimately, yes, there is more politicization of the LGPS than I can remember.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So let's go back to Ewan, because Ewan, I know you keep you very close tabs on the political process and debate. What are you picking up about what the Labour Party is saying on the sort of Mansion House investment front?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we need to give a little bit of context. The entire strategy of Labour in terms if should become the next government is fundamentally to increase investment, particularly in public services. What it needs to do is to drive economic growth. And it views the retirement sector as fundamental to this. So it has announced, I mean, it supports the Mansion House agenda, and it said that if anything, they will go faster and further. They have said that they're going to conduct a complete review of all types of pensions and retirement savings plans. This includes both DB, DC, as well as public sector schemes, such as the LGPS, funded and unfunded. And they're going to set out a strategy when they enter government. Specifically for the LGPS, they have said that they will evaluate the different models for pooling in order to deliver better returns for savers and also increase investments in productive assets. What I'm picking up in a softer environment is Labour is both perplexed and frustrated at the pace of pooling. They say that this policy came out in 2015, and I believe the figure that was given in the pooling consultation was only something about 38% of assets had been formally pooled. So they're wondering why that figure is so low and what they need to be in order to drive it higher.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, thank you. We're going to finish at 1:45, so we've got 5 or 6 minutes left. So time for a couple more questions on any of the topics that we've been covering. I'm just going to bring in one from Karen McWilliam. It's not a pooling question, that's fine, Karen. But she says, going back to Neil's initial points regarding recruitment and retention issues, and I know, Neil, from my own conversations with your colleagues around the LGPS, this comes up all the time. She says, obviously, there are issues also in third-party administrators, but a greater issue is the difficulties in paying staff at decent levels, given the restrictions in local authority pay policies. Has the Good Governance Project missed a trick in not going further with separation? What would Neil suggest needs to be done?
Karen, you are naughty. You know my views on this. I don't think that the Good Governance Review went far enough. You're asking some blue sky thinking, which for a dyed-in-the-wool old council officer like me is a big challenge. There are potentially different models that we could look at. I'm not going to sit here and say that that we should have huge inflated salaries across the LGPS, although it would be very nice. But there, as I say, I think there are models. Local authority trading company, I don't know. That's just completely off the top of my head, but different models of delivering the priorities for our schemes without the confines of a council structure that has a different set of incredibly laudable, incredibly important priorities, but a different set of priorities.
Thanks, Neil. And Maria, did you have any comment on this idea of more separation between fund and local authority?
I think it's definitely a question that deserves some more thinking. So I'm quite curious to see what will come out on that, on the good government consultation, and see if there's space for making that argument, and to see what also our members think about it. But yes, it's still a very, very important and relevant topic for LGPS funds.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. So we've got a couple of minutes left. There's no questions in the Q&A box at the moment, but I'm going to pick up one or two that Alison Murray kindly sent in advance, because some good ones here. I mean, Alison asked, for example, what are the panel's views on whether poorly performing funds, where performance is linked to governance and service to members stroke employers rather than just investment funds, should those poorly performing funds be required to submit and execute an improvement plan, or be required to merge or consolidate with a better performing fund? It's quite a long question, but you get the gist. Neil, views on that?
Well, you'd have it in other situations with councils are underperforming. I'm not a fan of compulsion, so I've already mentioned that before. Firstly, because it's devilishly, as I've mentioned before, it's devilishly difficult for partners to come together who actually want to come together, let alone those who don't. I think there's a whole democratic accountability issue that we need to consider there. But yes, I am supportive of more of comparative KPIs across the funds, and setting a really high standard that we should all look to achieve. And yes, putting in place a mechanism by which peer reviews, that might be a way of achieving that, where high performing funds can support other funds. And then you might get a situation where those funds actually choose the option of coming together and consolidating. That may be a case.
Okay, thanks, Neil. And I think this might again be one for you, I'm afraid, Neil, but Maria, chip in if you want. Again, it's Alison asking, what do the panel think could or should be done to mitigate the risk that the government seeking to encourage greater investment in areas such as levelling up, UK equities and so on, will lead to pension committees becoming more political and less effective? Will updated legal advice on fiduciary duty be enough, or does there need to be a rethink of how LGPS funds are governed and managed?
It's a big question. It's a long question too, isn't it? Well, yeah, it's going to go back to governance here, isn't it? It's for councils to look at how they're constituted. That whole relationship. I mean, ultimately, however we set up our, at least in local authorities, however we set up our constitutions, the democratic accountability is always going to be able to change it. So I'm going back a number of years now when there was talk about more formal separation and the joint committee type arrangement that we were talking about that exists with South Yorkshire, and that should, and George would probably be able to give you more information, but it should remove some of the political risk from this situation that Alison talks of.
Okay, well, I said we'd finish at 11:45, so we'd better do so. And thank you, and apologies to Neil Campbell. I see Neil did put a question at the last moment in the Q&A box there about the Lothian pension fund, but maybe Marie, you and I can have a look at that afterwards and get back to it. So thank you to Maria and Ewan and Neil for leading us through this very interesting, very full conversation. There's been a lot to cover. That's been really great. Thank you. We will circulate the recording, and we'll just link as well to articles and documents as well. So we'll put all those in an email. Don't forget, got to give it another plug, our local authority conference, including the Minister, in the Cotswolds, 11th to the 13th of June. We're all going to be there, and I hope as many of you dialing in today will join us as well. And also look out, keep your eyes open for our new online PLSA member platform that we're going to be launching in just a few weeks' time. There's been a bit of warm-up communications going out. That's going to be a really good new sort of member opportunity, I think, to get good access to our material, but also to engage and network online with other PLSA members. We're really looking forward to what we can do with that. So thanks again to our speakers. Thanks to everyone who's joined us today, and enjoy the rest of the day. Goodbye.